As you troop in, my name is Abimbola, and I'm going to be introducing the hosts of today's conversation shortly. But feel free to please drop your name and where you are dialing in from in the chat so we can get to know everything that's happening. We have a couple of minutes to do that. So introduce yourself. I can see Andre, Aubrey. Hi, Chido. Hi, Frank. Hi, Francois. Nice to see you. Okay, that's nice. I see Aubrey from South Africa. Nice. Tala from NY, from Canada, from Zambia. I love it. This is such a varied room. So much. I mean, it's maps. We're talking about maps, and everybody knows about maps. So I really expect every corner of the map to be represented. But nice to see everyone here. Ooh, Austria. That's so cool. That's so cool. Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to go into introduction slightly as we begin. My name is Abimbola Ogundairo. I'm the Advocacy and Campaigns Lead for Africa No Filter. And you are here today because you care about how Africa is represented, especially on the map. So thank you so much for taking your time to dial in and be part of this conversation. We truly, truly are looking forward to a fun thing. I'm going to be doing just a very brief intro to our speakers, to the organizations behind all of this, and then we're again getting straight into the fun part. But before I start, I want to tell you something. Did you know? I don't know if this is my country. I'm proud of my country to a good extent. But the Sambisa forest in Nigeria, in northeast Nigeria, did you know it's bigger than Belgium and the Netherlands put together? Did anyone at all? I found this out like last month, and my mind was blown. And what else? I know when we all think of Canada, we all see it as it's a really big place. They have like, I think, 6 time zones. Did you know that 3 Canadas would comfortably sit inside Africa? Comfortably. These are things that we don't even allow ourselves to think of, possibly because of the maps we're seeing. And that's the point of this conversation. How important is it, to have the correct map? Why is the map such a big fat lie, as we've called it right now? And what does it mean for Africa to take up space? Why does this need to happen? I don't have the answers. The experts do. I know, Chido, that's crazy. I know. The experts do, and they're going to be telling us all about it. And so now I'm going to be introducing you to our speakers for today. On the screen, you can see Eniola. Eniola Mafe Abaga is, I want to feel free to fangirl right now. She's just, she's everything, but she's also the Global Advocacy and Partnerships Director at Bridges to Prosperity. She has over 15 years of experience advancing strategic partnerships and policy change across the Global South. I feel inclined to include here that she's such a geek about maps. She knows everything there is to know. She really does know. She speaks, and my brain is trying to compute. So believe her when she tells you things today. And she's leading at Bridges to Prosperity. She's leading efforts to institutionalize rural access in national development plans. I want to say this simply. She's connecting people with roads and bridges, and that's amazing. Thank you so much, Eniola, for being here. There's so much to her profile, but we cannot read it all. But just so you know, she was also the co-founder of the New Nigerian, which is an online civic community of over 50,000 members working to reimagine Nigeria's future. And she was one of OK Africa's 100 Women in Africa. I told you she's everything. So thank you so much, Eniola, for being here. I'm going to be handing over the mic to you shortly. But do you want to say hello to the room?
Hi everyone, and thank you, Abimbola. That's a very kind introduction. I hope I fill those shoes that you said. But
I'm
no,
sure you
I'm
do.
actually I get to fangirl for the next speaker, so this is a great kind of pay it forward of fangirling. So I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Eniola. And the other person in the room is Professor Carlos Lopez. I want to begin by saying Professor Carlos is one of the reasons this campaign exists today. He's been such a huge voice in the African space. He's a professor in the Mandela School of Public Governance at the University of Cape Town. He's a visiting professor a professor at Sciences Po Paris, and an associate fellow in the Africa Program and Chatham House. He has held several leadership positions across the UN, the AU, as a policy director for Secretary General Kofi Annan and for UNECA. He holds honorary doctorate degrees. I mean, we are calling him Prof. There's a reason. And he was a member of the African Union Reform Team led by the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. The list is long, but I am going to complete it because he deserves this. And he's also the High Representative for Partnerships with Europe, as well as a member of the Global Commission for Economy and Climate. One of my favorite things about Professor Carlos is that he will use his voice to advocate for African representation anywhere, and is truly, truly one of the leading, advocates for what we are here for today. So thank you so much, Prof, for being here. It's truly a pleasure to have you. We are going to pass the mic to Eniola, but shortly there's a poll that we would love to get everyone to just put their opinions on. It's a very short poll, so please feel free to just tick. I'm going to give like a few seconds. It's coming up. And then we'll take like 1 minute or two to address that. And while that is going on, if you are new to Africa No Filter or Speak Up Africa, we are the curators, producers of the Correct the Map campaign. What is Correct the Map campaign? We are simply saying the popular maps being used by the world is wrong. It's wrong because there is no way Greenland and Africa are the same size. Africa is 14 times larger, and there are so many other ways that the continent has been, underrepresented, using maps in different institutions, websites, and schools, and different ways. And this is our intervention to correct that lie. We refuse to participate in the lie about us as Africans to say, we're using a map that doesn't fully show who we are. And Correct the Map is calling on everyone right here to use the correct map. It's the Equal Earth projection. It shows the correct size of Africa in relation to the rest of the world. And it is the right thing to do. We're going to be going into why it is the right thing to do shortly. But just as a background, Speak Up Africa and Africa No Filter came together to do this. We are advocacy organizations. Africa No Filter is all about correcting the narrative. We believe that by doing stories that represent Africa the way it is, we can shift the stereotypes, the perceptions of Africans especially, and of the world. So I hope everyone has gotten some comfortable position, stay in the room. I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to a great conversation. Eniola, over to you. All the best.
Thank you so much, Abimbola. Thank you. And so I think we will get into it because we don't have too much time as well. So thank you, Abimbola. As she mentioned that I'm Global Advocacy and Partnerships Director at Bridges to Prosperity, and I lead across Africa and globally to make rural access and policy and funding priority. And access is power, and power comes from knowing. And knowing is the data, the mapping, the infrastructure that we can build that can help us make better decisions. And I'm truly honored to be joined by Professor Carlos Lopez. I mean, it's an honor to share this space with you for various reasons, because I'm in development and you are one of the North Stars for many of us working on Africa's kind of economic future. And now I know that you had been instrumental in shaping this strategy and how we can get more voices around this. We need more petitions, I think, for this work to move forward as well. So I want to, I guess, in terms of this, is maybe handing over to you, because a lot of this thinking you were very much involved with. So I'm actually really curious and want to hear, like, why.
Well, thank you, Aniola. Your energy and generosity comes across. Yes, so I'm really very happy to be here in this panel with you. Well, in fact, I came across these kind of problems a long time ago. It was for me a bit of a mystery why some facts that should be common knowledge were not actually reflected in the way the media was treating the continent. But beyond the media, also the development specialists, the institutions. But what really saddened me the most was the fact that even our own organization, the African Union, and subsidiary bodies like the various agencies of the African Union don't seem to be aware of some basic facts about the continent that counter the narrative about its inferiority. And therefore, it was important for me first to go at the origins of this. And the origins are to be found in the teachings, for instance, of Hegel, a very famous philosopher that influenced a lot the way the Renaissance shaped and also, to a certain extent, the modernity as it has been constructed, including from the likes of Karl Marx and so on. It's from to give an idea that it is from the wide spectrum of key conceivers of what is the modernity of today, left, right, you would say, in the language of politics. And all of them seem to adopt this idea that is constructed on two false truths. First is that, history starts with the writing word. The moment humanity passed to writing, that's when history starts. And today, everybody knows this doesn't make any sense. You can have, historical facts that are built on societal changes and transformation in different types of interactions amongst human beings, and that has nothing to do with the written word. But, so that was for a long time sort of in the minds of everybody. And that's the way we teach history in primary school still today. It's not said with these many words that it is when it starts, but it continues to be more or less the marker. And the second was that because of that, Africa was, sort of a latecomer. Well, both are
Mm.
completely stupid. If you
In
go
that
into the
lexicon, right? So in
yes,
that
yeah,
framework, we were behind.
and of course, you go into where really the first more elaborate uh, writing started, and you can go to the Egyptian civilization, and then immediately it was no, but the Egyptian civilization is part of a thread that goes into Greece and then into Western civilization. So it kind of sucked up from Africa, as if geographically speaking, it had nothing to do with Africa. And if you ask even Egyptians today, the majority of them will think that their history is more Arabic than African, when in fact Arabic comes from the fact that it is from the Arabian Peninsula. And of course, the uh, works of Sheikh Anta Diop, famous historian from Senegal, that gives the name to the university of the capital, Dakar, on dating a certain number of artifacts and characteristics of the Egyptian civilization led him to construct these black connections with the Nubian civilization and demonstrate that, in fact, the Egyptian, as it is described, it's a bit of a falsehood and it
Mm.
needs to be reinterpreted. But what was important was from his strong energy put into this a demonstration that we needed a counter narrative. It doesn't mean that he's the only one, but definitely we have indulged in always associating Africa with anything that is negative, and eventually we kind of got accustomed to it, and our own institutions absorb it, our own journalists absorb it, our own leaders absorb it, and of course our school manuals absorb it. So how do we change that?
Yeah,
And
and
you end up
there's a cost. There's a cost to this. When I think about it, you're talking about what has been put down has been fundamentally wrong. Therefore, the mindsets that we have on top of that have been distorted. And the way we even may see ourselves as Africans, as people on the African continent, over time has probably been eroded. And I would assume that that would come with a cost of that mindset has significant costs, which I mean, you're an economist, so you're able to probably quantify that. I'm curious about that part as well.
Yeah, it has a huge cost because you see, if you, let's say, you don't need to be a very sophisticated economic mind to realize that, Africa has been kind of stuck in the same economic structure since the colonial times.
Mm,
During the colonial times, we were an exporter of commodities without value addition. If you take the statistics of 2024, 2025, you will see that we have 35 countries that are considered in the UN category of highly dependent on commodities without value addition, which means that they have about 80% of their exports. It depends on commodities. And then you will realize that the economic structures have not changed that much. And in 6 decades of development, or if you want 6 decades of independence, have not changed the structure, something is wrong. And for me, what is wrong is that we have been pushed into an interpretation of comparative advantage that is very much the same that was applied to the colonial territories. Your advantage is to export minerals and to export natural resources. It's not about the people, it's not about the transformation, and definitely it's not about industrialization and all the things that have occurred in a much larger uh, space of the world, such as, Europe first, then Americas, and more recently in Asia, that has taken over that sort of role. And I think the economic cost comes from the fact that we treat the African economies like we used to treat the colonial territories. You don't need that much data. They have natural resources. So talk about Botswana. Oh, they have diamonds. You talk about Zambia. Oh, they have copper. And you don't need much more data than that if you are going to treat these spaces for commodities. Now, if you want really to do transformation, you need data. And what is the data that are the most important for your economic policy, your planning? Well, let's go one by one. There are three of them, basically. First is what the economists call national accounts. The national accounts is sort of how you measure your economy, its structure, its size, and its characteristics. Well, there are only 17 countries in Africa out of 54 that have their national accounts up to date, meaning that they follow the methodologies of the UN Statistical Commission, that they have the year base that serves as a comparator that is not older than 5, all these things. But the bottom line is that if you don't know the national accounts, if they are not up to date, they are fabricated. Okay? So, second, you need to know your people. So, there are 40% of Africans that don't have civil registration. They don't have birth certificates, they don't have IDs, they don't have passports.
I've
And,
heard that essentially that a person living in 2025 as opposed to someone living in 1925 in
yeah,
Africa
yeah,
could live and die and not ever be registered anywhere.
exactly.
And when we think about that, we think about invisibility and we think about who and what are these, they matter, right? They matter. I think we talk about population a lot, and I think economists like ourselves probably talk about population, but I think it's the lives, the richness of each of those lives within that space, which I think also connects with maybe your first piece that you'd mentioned about the accounts. If we don't know who
Yes.
we have, then how do we account for them?
So you project, you sort of made up. And then the third is territory. We have only 10% of the land that should be registered that is actually with land tenure systems that are properly registered. So 90%, it's sort of informal. So if you have these three, you don't know your economy, you don't know your people, you don't know your territory in detail, how do you plan? No, you plan because you export copper, but you can't plan if you want to transform the economy. And
Mm,
this is one of the costs, but there are more costs. So then you are trying to develop and you want to assess risk to attract investors and so on. Who assesses risk? The rating agencies do. And they do it on the basis of data that is produced, let's say, by the IMF. The IMF will tell you whether your debt is sustainable or is not sustainable. Let's translate that into practice. Well, if you have a population of X and you have a debt of Y, you will say the debt to per capita is this much. If you know your economy, if your national accounts were producing the right numbers, probably you will realize that maybe your debt is not as big as it looks.
Exactly.
Because,
I use reference.
because your economy has been underestimated.
Yeah.
So therefore, what they say it's a very high debt in relation to your size. This size has been fabricated. It's not based on data that is real. And we have this kind of problems. And then you'll say, well, the risk is because there is conflict. Risk is because there is corruption. Risk is because there is bad governance. Okay, let's take a few examples to demonstrate how fallacious this can be. So here is a country like Ethiopia. It has been growing in the last 15 years over 5% per year, despite probably some underestimation of its size. But this is how much they have been growing. Then you have a country that has a comparable size in population, like Thailand. And what is the treatment of Thailand in relation to Ethiopia? Ethiopia will say has problems of governance, has some civil wars, and has some unrest, but it has been growing at 5%. Then you go into Thailand that is treated completely different. You know how many coups Thailand has had? 10 so far. 10 coups. Then you go and say, oh, it's because there is a lot of violence. Okay, in the Indian borders of Kashmir and the areas where the Naxalites are operating, you have more people killed in conflict than in the Great Lakes in Africa. How is India treated? As a basket case of conflict? No. Then you say, okay, in the state of Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil, you have more homicides just there than the whole of Africa. But you say that South Africa is the most dangerous country and all that. So you see, we have this kind of perceptions that are based on interpretations that are fabricated. But
Yeah.
we are here to discuss maps, and there is nothing worse to construct this narrative than the way we look into geography. Geography is very political. It has scientific basis, but you can sort of twist it to make it political. And that's exactly what is happening in relation to Africa. If you consider that this continent is inferior, and even within the continent, if you consider that the part that is black is less important than the part that is sort of more whitish, like North Africa, you create categories. Categories like Sub-Saharan Africa. What is that? All the data that is produced by these international organizations is produced as Sub-Saharan Africa. When they talk about Africa, it's Sub-Saharan Africa because they kind of created a category that is Middle East and North Africa separated that is not considered as Africa. But is it really true that they are Sub-Saharan? Well, let's look. Is Mali Sub-Saharan? No, Mali is Saharan, not Sub-Saharan. Mali is in the Sahara. Is Niger Sub-Saharan? No, it's not Sub-Saharan. Niger is Saharan. But then, in the Middle East and North Africa category, you will find a country like, let's say, Sudan. Sudan doesn't have anything Sub-Saharan. It does. So what is the rationale? The rationale is political.
And also the maps, historic, I collect vintage maps of Africa, and because of this point you raised, Prof, about, well, what are we saying, Saud, or the Sudan, and the use of words and the use of the location and space and place across the continent has changed. The viewpoints have changed over time. You can see that on the maps themselves, from 16th century to 15th, 16th century. I've got maps from the 17th century, trade routes and the like. And there's actually more trade routes in maps from 1920 than there are trade routes now. So it's telling us something. The maps are not neutral. I think you say this a lot, like maps in development are not neutral. They're for a reason, for an agenda, for an outcome. And it changes. We know that maps changes mindsets. If somewhere is bigger than somewhere else, you believe that that place is immediately more important. And I think the point that you raised about like, let's look again, like I'm curious about this because we've kind of used our AI in the past 5 years. We've used a lot of technology to really start saying like, hey, we should probably look at this again. I mean, in our work, it's really hard governments and others are saying rural areas are too hard, too far, or too few to fund or to support infrastructure there. Is it that they're reading the old map? Prof, or is it, do we think about the sheer number of the maps that are built? Is it the waterways? For example, we uncovered that 77 million miles of untapped waterways using our AI products, right? And we're not we're not ChatGPT. We're not these big companies. We're a small entity that just wanted to understand what we were looking at. And I feel like there's a lot of entities that are really saying like, hey, we should look at this again. And you mentioned that, the most scalable stakeholders, governments, the people who are supposed to support those three areas that you mentioned to make policy are probably going off of non-existent data in many cases, or inaccurate data, or maliciously inaccurate data.
Mm. Like, for instance, what are the priorities when it comes to building the real data? Let's say that in Congo, DRC, you have an amazing challenge to try to have everybody with civil registration. Agreed. Very large territory, large population, difficult logistics. You can draw a very long list of reasons why it is challenging. But all of a sudden, the international community, so-called international community, has no bones in mobilizing, as it has done twice, $500 million, which is $500 million, to organize the registry for an election. Oh, for the election, it is possible. But to be just a citizen with your ID that will allow you to get out of informality, that's not a priority. So you see, the priorities are completely mixed. I'm not saying that I'm against elections, but the 500 million should be used to have civil registration that would allow elections and many more things. Because what happens is that after the elections, we are down to zero again, because it was just used for the elections, not for the integration of individuals in society. The same in relation to national accounts. So the IMF will say, well, this country has a debt problem. And this is the service of the debt. So it has to pay this much and it's not getting enough. But, this is based on projections. But the IMF has every year in every country a consultation about, the economy of that country. And one of the things that they look at is the national accounts. So what should be the priority of the IMF when they visit countries that don't have national accounts up to date is to help them get to that level. But they rather just project with their econometric models a replacement of this absence. So you have countries that have been 20 years without proper national accounts. This is insane. With all the funds that have gone into these countries, that you cannot fix this. And then you have NGOs that will, proclaim that, the priority is small is beautiful and you microcredit and all that. So you create this glorification of the informal sector as if it was the solution for our problems.
Wait a minute. So, sorry, Prof, can you repeat? Because sorry, I'm married to a rapper. So, I've got to, when I see a bar, we must double click on it. Could you please repeat that?
it is quite striking that, we end up with this idea that, because informality is a way to get people above the water, it's fine. But we don't want people above the water. We want transformation. That's a very different proposition. And it's a proposition that's not going to be possible if people don't even have a civil registry. How are you going to have a bank account? How are you going to be able to raise money? How are you going to actually contribute to the economy by paying taxes even and benefiting from services? It's all done like a favor if
Mm.
you are informal. You are not a citizen. And this sort of uh, prolongs commodity exports is the way we prolong the structure of the colonial times. Having people with civil registration that are just part of the population, 60%, and another 40 that are not, is also prolonging an asymmetric society where there have people that are considered citizens and others that are not. They are subjects because they are informal. And this is,
Why are place and people so important for the continent, right? I feel like there's something specifically in the way we map or space ourselves. This we're on a round table talking about taking up space, right? But why is that particularly important for us as Africans? Because I struggle to explain this to others outside of the continent because I feel like this idea of people and place is so almost otherworldly of a notion of this continent that almost the definitions that even you've mentioned about what's sub-Saharan, what's Saharan, we just don't fit into any of those boxes.
no,
And maybe it's building a whole new one. I know you're much more well versed in this because you're talking about like how do we transform this at the like global significant level where we are telling a narrative that is not just like we are not this, it is saying we are this. And I feel like there's
yes,
a significant shift in that narrative that is like you're not the ambassador saying, oh, no, no, we're not poor, we're not corrupt, we're not, we're not small. No, what are we? There's something there. And I just wondered if you had some thoughts about that in addition to this kind of taking up space kind of conversation here.
yeah, and Yola, we can start by interrogating why is Google Maps still using the Mercator projection of the 17th century that is not reflective of the real size of the landmass? Why is it? Is it because they don't have the scientific knowledge to do better? Of course they do. Of course, Google Maps can do the right thing.
Yeah.
So why is it that when you zoom, it's okay, but when you zoom out, you go back to Mercator. You zoom in, yes, you have the borders as they are and so on. You zoom out, you get Mercator. You get the size of Africa that you are used to see in all these illustrations, maps, and so on, that does not correspond to the reality. We don't need to say it enough, but in this campaign, you can demonstrate that Africa is large enough to fit all of Europe, all of the US, all of Japan, all of China, all of India, all of, most of countries in East Asia, and still has space. United States, and still has space. Or, if you prefer, another comparator that is quite striking, that, we think that in the world maps as we know it, the Russian territory is so vast from one extreme in the east to the other extreme in the west. And we don't know that we have the same vastness between the east and the west coasts of Africa. That's not the way we see it. So we are huge. And because we are huge, the first thing that we have to admit is that we are not that populated. We don't have that much population for our size.
That,
we are
oh, that's an
under
interesting
we are
one because
underpopulated, and the people tend to believe that we are in this demographic boom and we are going to sort of cause the collapse of humanity, when in fact we are so huge in territory. We have all these if you put all these countries that I just mentioned together and you count their population and you count the African population, say, but Africa is not that populated at all. because we have always been seen in this sort of smaller, complex world as a marginal player. And there are other consequences to this because, for instance, not seeing the real landmass of Africa does not make people realize that we have the largest blue economy of the world. We have the largest coasts. Therefore, our territorial waters are the largest in the world. There's no competition, not even close. That's not the way it is seen. So we keep basically talking always about this downgraded version of Africa
Mm,
from an opportunity point of view that then enters into a psyche and
yeah.
becomes a mindset. It's so sad.
For us, it's affected everything. In we are an engineering and tech nonprofit. We build. That's our bread and butter, building in rural infrastructure. But when we think about the advocacy, using our tools to kind of share advocacy about like what we're seeing does not seem to correlate with the sheer size and magnitude of the space that we're operating in. And when we look at rural infrastructure, even from a population perspective, it's what 60% of the population is rural across Africa. You're talking about that in a broader landmass than we could. So when we think about agricultural outcomes, when we think about travel times to travel to markets and the like, we see this popping up significantly in a lot of our work. But then we have this conversation that rural investment is being dismissed as too niche, but it's 60% of a population of a significant landmass. It's too expensive. Yeah, okay. Well, when you measure it according to maybe a landmass of Germany, possibly it could be too expensive with the but when we're thinking about that in terms of vast corridors that could open up trade, then I can't take that as as an excuse, or also that it's not scalable. Well, there seems to be space for scale. There seems to be appetite for scale. There seems to be a need from food security to school attendance, the amount of provisions or essential services that even limited across the continent. So when we're seeing that communities aren't seen in the large space that we're in, I think this kind of distorted portrayal, yes, I think we've addressed like the fact that it's dangerous, it becomes costly. But to our work, it's like the 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 vein. It's like the vagus nerve or whatever kind of significant thing that if that gets cut, then we're really seeing that it could be possible to invest in ways that historically it just simply was overlooked. It's possible to do things in ways that didn't seem possible because of our limited view or our limited mindset. But then translating it to policy making, like
Mm.
how does it affect your work? I think probably those who may be listening come from various different schools of thought. I've been seeing some in the messages, but I'm just wondering in terms of, because we talk about leadership and the need for this to be transformative at scale. I'm just curious about the policy making. How does this affect the work on policy making?
Well, we can encapsulate it in one concept. You treat agriculture as a social sector, not as an economic sector. And there's a huge difference between the two. If you treat it as a social sector, it's about poverty reduction, resilience, basically what I described succinctly as having your head above the water. So it's about making sure that these societies that have not really evolved from a production system that is now surpassed by the competitiveness of other regions are going to be able to survive, not are going to be able to transform. Survive is basically what you do altruistically because you are generous, you want to help people, So it's a concept that is very much enshrined in our religious beliefs. You help people survive. You help them. You give them a hand. That's treating agriculture as a social sector. So you go there and you say, let's improve the latrines. You go there and say, let's make sure that, we are not going to be a manual sort of labor intensity, and we are going to replace it with a bit of new instruments and tools. You go there and you say, let's give them seeds that are going to be more nutrient and so on. But you really are not
Addressing that.
including people into the value chain of agricultural
Mhm.
products that are going to create a completely different production system, that where they will specialize first, they will become much more profitable because they specialize and they trade. But how can you trade if you don't have civil registration? I mean, you end up, with this equation about informality. What we are witnessing in Africa is acceleration of our urbanization, right? So we're seeing the cities popping up, or the population of those in existence growing exponentially. And people may even say, but we still have about 60% of our population in rural areas, which is true, Eniola. But what people forget is that our population is much bigger. It's like we are talking about uh, a village that becomes 100,000
Right,
inhabited.
right.
So
That's
it's no
it's a,
longer a
yeah,
village.
the scale and sheer. It's
Yeah.
not a hamlet in the UK.
Yes, it's a
It is
sprawl.
like
It's a sprawl.
it's a sprawl. And so,
It's a sprawl.
I want to point in because we've been utilizing this idea, which is kind of connected with staying with place. And I want to get your thoughts on it because these corridors, conversations around corridors, which kind of show that sheer scale of a continent. And whenever I'm hearing, the recent AFDB president, well, the newly elected president speaking about trade and the importance of making the right investment in the most, efficient ways. Um, Not having a map sounds like a bit of a problem. Um, Not having waterways mapped sounds like a bit of a problem in the age of climate change. Being 5 years away from the end of the SDG for this, and we are, I would probably say we're amongst friends, right? Woefully behind,
Well,
right?
according to the official data released yesterday, 60%.
Oh, okay.
We have accomplished 16%. 16%, 1 6.
Oh, 16. We have you heard it here. I'm a fan of I'm a baby and probably a fan of the SDGs. It's aspirational. It helps kind of get people thinking around big concepts that they probably wouldn't. And it does help with frameworking. But threats are mounting. The space at which, flood-prone areas that we never used to think were flood-prone areas are turning into them. There's more and more vulnerability. So it feels like so urgent. Like correct the map, what Africa Unfiltered, what this entire team is trying, like coalition of players is trying to do just seems mammoth on one side. I'm like a bit of a pragmatist. I'm like, wow, okay, we want to. I don't think this was done since, flat Earth times, I would probably assume. Or that, I think it's been a long time since, significant shift in the geography of things. But also like it's like, Africa's future is the beneficiary of this. Like it has to happen. It's like a thing that needs to happen. So I'm just curious of like, yeah, how do we do this transformatively at scale, significantly, petitions, energy, what it actually needs to be done.
Yeah, well, I was in Berlin last week. And, I was told by the professors of the place where I was going to give a lecture that, you see this frame that we have here at the entrance of the hall. It has nothing in it. It's just an empty frame. It's because there was a map there, and the students ripped it apart because, it was not a real map. It was a wrong projection. So I felt vindicated, said, but why is this happening in Berlin and not happening in Abuja?
Yeah.
This is the problem. How are we still using maps that don't make any sense? So apparently, at least in some pockets here and there, people are realizing this is nonsensical. So how can you in today's world still use maps that do not correspond to the landmass? Well, one of the objectives is political, is to reduce the importance of certain parts of the world, in particular Africa, because it's the most affected by this distortion. And this campaign does need the young people to mobilize. It does need petitions, as you said. It needs to, impose almost on the international organizations that they should not tolerate the use of maps that do not project the real landmass.
I'm
Uh,
seeing
and
examples
and I
starting.
think it's almost like an identity issue. And
Yeah.
I hope that at least those who are here in this call are going to be the propellers of a movement that we need to change this state of affairs. I mean, it's intolerable.
I feel like tech gets emerging tech definitely gets a balanced viewpoint, right? Some people think it's the death of everything, some think it's the opening up. Maybe I'll use the more of the positive side of tech. With AI, you're able to, you know, leapfrog. I hate say. Oh, I said the word. I said the
Mhm.
word, Prof. I'm sorry, but essentially with AI, you're now seeing and being able to do very quick computations, and those are in the hands of, as you said, like young people. Um, I saw something here about let's start the narrative in kindergarten, and changing the view of the map from the start. That would require engaging in, educational institutions and government again. Um, and yeah, so that was really it. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the lessons from dealing with this issue of narratives that I collected uh, in my professional experience is that the moment you touch certain things that are uncomfortable, people will say, but, and then, the sentence starts with a but, as a way of diminishing the importance of correcting the narrative. I will give some examples so people know what I'm talking about. You'll say, okay, do you know that it is an African country that is the largest investor in India? It's not Japan, it's not the US, it's not even China. It's an African country. Say, really? Yes, it's Mauritius. Oh, but, you see, the but comes. Then you say, well, did you know that the largest corporation in China for tech is Tencent? And the largest shareholder of that corporation is an African company called Naspers, based in South Africa. I said, oh, but, and you can go on with the list. If you say that, for instance, the South Africa exports cars to the US, it's a but. So anything that is positive is always accompanied with a but and is reduced to its minimum importance. It's like eccentric, cannot be associated with the African brand. It has to be isolated from the brand because the brand has to be negative. So if you say something positive, it's going to be diminished, eccentric, and put aside. Now, imagine the opposite. Oh, there is a huge Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. You know what the World Bank did? They did a study saying that the impact in Africa is going to be 30 billion. I say, but what do you mean impact in Africa? These are three countries in Africa that represent about 6% of the Africans' economy. How can, the three together have about 5 billion GDP? How can the impact be 30 billion? They said, no, 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 because it's going to impact the whole of Africa. But it's not in the whole of Africa, it's just in these three countries. Doesn't matter. When it's negative, it's the opposite. it's expanded to cover the whole of the continent. Like the rating agencies that influence the behavior of the investors will say, okay, this country, Benin, has this rating, which is investment grade, or it is speculative, or it is junk, whatever. What they classify for that country, then you have an entrepreneur that is doing incredibly well, is exporting a product that is in high demand, and goes to the market and he tries to have a rating for his company. They'll say, but you already have a rating for your country. No, 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 but I want one for my company. No, but it's your country, and then we apply that across the board. They only do this for Africa. They don't do it in another part of the world. So why is it that in Africa you have always these generalizations of the negative?
How do we? I think one of the pieces I'm encouraged by is some of the very soft power that African people have across, maybe some of my biases that I'm Nigerian and we're usually not wallflowers, considered as wallflowers. So wherever we are, we bring our music, our creativity and the like. And, there's Afro beats to the world, there's African art to the world. And maybe there's power in that creative economy piece that that is entering into the zeitgeist and the marrow of all of the global world, right? In ways that, protests or papers may not have. Because someone even mentioned about the media bias and some of the I think I'm looking at some of the pieces around African businesses printing their own maps and becoming mainstream. We do have the map that, a map that does a better job. Some conversations have said that sometimes that map is hard to be able to turn into some of the apps, and also from a technical perspective with pixels and projections and the like. I'm very curious because I collect maps. Our work at Bridges to Prosperity works around mapping GIS. We really have seen that as a game changer for not only developing better data, but also being able to use that data for insights for building. So I'm just curious about what you're seeing in terms of how young African people can use different tools around this to get a better understanding of the importance of how we see ourselves.
Yeah, I think, the apps not being able to use as easily the right maps as they use the current ones is bogus. Uh, Algorithms, can be changed and can be adjusted to produce whatever. And I think, in fact, it's the opposite that is true, is that they really have to bend back to be able to use the maps that they use right now because they don't correspond to the data that is available in scientific terms. And this characteristic has gone unnoticed because of comfort. As I say, narratives are based on comfort. People are comfortable with what they think is true, and they bend the reality to fit that frame. And that's what happens with maps, as it happens with a number of other sort of descriptions, like in literature and so on. You will always have this negative view of Africa that is built from time immemorial. The reasons have been explained. Now, it is really the responsibility for the Africans to change this. I'm not expecting that the others are going to be the ones at the forefront, at the vanguard of changing these perceptions about the continent. It is our job, and it has to start at home. Our institutions have to really be extremely zealous about not letting this go. Our manuals in schools have to be extremely rigorous about this change. And, that's why we need this campaign. We need this campaign to mobilize the energies and the efforts of many to do the right thing. It's just it's so incredible that we have now all this influence that you were mentioning in soft power, fashion, music, culture, and we have to use our stars to also be part of this campaign. Because they have a voice now that has become international and global, and they have to enter into this by ways that are non-orthodox. Like, for instance, you remember the times where everybody was wearing shirts with the US flag and I don't know what, all the memorabilia that
Yeah,
was linked to the US, it was popularized by their icons of culture, right?
yeah.
Their
Hmm.
stars and so on. Then you remember at the time of the Beatles and all that, maybe you're too young for remembering, but you have seen on TV, and everybody was with this British flag
Hmm.
all over them. uh, the Africans should be all over with the right map on their T-shirts, on their memorabilia, on their stages, and so on, because they are going to be listened to, they are going to be referenced, and they have a role to play, and I'm sure they will be convinced about how important this is, because I'm pretty convinced myself that they would with knowledge want to do the right thing.
Yeah. I know that we got some questions coming through. I am not the moderator. We're actually, I saw a message about our conversation. We are having a conversation, so we want to add some voices, I think, to it as well. Um, you can also just share some comments or questions in here as well. I think I'm seeing, I don't know, Prof, if there's any of the questions in there that you think we could look through. There's one piece around leapfrogging,
Yes,
it being misplaced. I think I
yes.
understand some of that question.
I'm going to use that leapfrogging to 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 introduce to you a metaphor that is behind most of my social media engagements and different platforms and so on, which is the metaphor of the cheetah. Because I think it sort of tells you a bit about the narratives. Um, we all remember that at a given point, development was associated with the rise of East Asia. And the countries that were doing extremely well in East Asia were considered the Asian tigers. So they kind of, had this animal representing symbolically the incredible rise of these countries. So about 20 years ago, there was a movement initiated by some consulting firm to identify opportunities in Africa as also Africa Rising story. And that Africa Rising story was translated into Lions on the Move. So it's
Yeah,
like, we are the equivalent of the tiger. So we have now a number of countries in Africa that are on the move, and these are like the African lions. Always hated that metaphor. And I hated that metaphor because the lion
it's pretty
is a
lazy.
show off. The lion is a show off. The lion is territorial.
Mm.
The lion is not gender sensitive. It's just a lazy one that, hits after the lionesses have done the job. And worse even, the lions have a rate of efficiency that is extremely low. So they kind of hang around. And if there is something passing, they attack. But, as a predator, it's not very efficient. There's no planning. It's sort of, casual. We don't want Africa to be like that. We don't want to have leaders that are show off, that are lazy, that are uncoordinated and not programmed, that have a very low rate of efficiency, and that are not gender sensitive. So away from the lions. That's the wrong metaphor. I think the real one that makes a difference is the cheetah. And this has a lot to do with leapfrogging. Why the cheetah? First, because if you are a latecomer, you are to actually surpass the others or attain the speed of the others with with a strength that is not very common. The cheetah is the fastest animal on earth, and it hails from Africa. So that's the metaphor. We have to be the fastest to catch up. Second, the cheetah is very strategic. That's why they are so elegant. They don't have gender differences in their chase. The rate of efficiency is extremely high because they only eat when they need, not when it's passing by.
Mhm.
And of course, the cheetah is also, for a variety of reasons, sort of the epitome of elegance. So let's be cheetahs, not lions.
Sorry to all the Lions fans out there. You have nothing against the animal, but yeah, I think that actually makes so much sense. And I think that idea around reclaiming the narrative. I think they said hyenas always eat a cheetah's dinner, sadly. There's a lot of lion and hyena in the
Opportunistics, opportunistic.
Hey, we need all of the players. I think that's also a tie into kind of the diversity of the ways that we can address this. Africa is such a rich continent filled with just a menagerie of humanity, and it's something I'm so proud of. Um, some people had asked some questions around like the practicality of this, like where do we take this moving forward? This is part of a bigger campaign, a bigger effort at various different levels for which this conversation is just a small part of. But I think a couple of notes that had come through was what do we do now? What do we do with the information we take? And so that was I also encourage those in the room. We were billed as experts, certainly Prof is. But you are also experts maybe in your field of what you can do. You're probably strategists and visionaries and mappers and developers, modelers in your own right. So please populate the chat with your suggestions, things that are aligned, ways or contacts or people. Also sign the petition, I think, from that's important. Like numbers. If we want to show the sheer size of the problem, we need to show the sheer size of us as the army behind that problem, wanting a solution. The AU Commission and other entities hear our voices when we're kind of speaking from one hymnal as well. Sorry, I was raised in the church, so I use a lot of spiritual references. But I'm just curious. I know for one thing, I want to look at our mapping and see where we can provide data to even your work and others in the space. We stumbled on a lot of the mapping work because we wanted to refine how we could better deliver for rural populations across Africa and the global South. Um, I think there are others who can come at this from various different levels, but Prof, I'm just wondering, what are kind of those immediate practical things that people here and listening could even take forward?
No, you said it, Eniola. I think it's very important that we all mobilize ourselves by signing the petition, by making sure that we call for the equal Earth projection to be used across the board, uh, starting with our own organization, starting with our countries with the school manuals. We have to really try to mobilize the numbers here. And if you have contacts with specific influencers of any sort, be it in the cultural space, in the political space, this is also an opportunity for us to make them do something that is really impactful and is going to make a change in the way Africa is perceived. because Africa is going to suffer for a long time the consequences of a narrative that has not been very favorable. But we can just lament that and do nothing about it, or we can really take up the fight and say, no, this is not acceptable, and we are going to make it change and do our part.
No, I think I agree. I didn't find anything in there that I did agree with at all. And also, I think utilizing influencers and those who are influential in the space who can use and lend their voice, that has been critical, especially with advocacy. So, um, just very, very excited. I just wanted to check how much more time that we may have. There were a couple more questions, but I do want to be mindful of time. See if any more float in.
It has been so wonderful, Eniola and Prof. It's been amazing. My head has been blowing. I'm hunting for questions for you. But in terms of time, thanks everyone for staying. We know we are a little beyond, what we agreed, but you would agree that this has been mind-blowing. So we will be wrapping up soon. But I think, Eniola, there was one question that I found to be so interesting. The person, Huda Medri, says, how would the others react to our African attempts to change the narrative and its underpinning maps? And I like that question because we're all thinking it.
Well, if I can venture an answer, and I know would hi to you. I would say that we have to put everybody on the defensive. So the same argument I use, that we should not be defensive ourselves. We definitely should put others on the defensive if they continue to insist on something that everybody knows is wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Prof. Thanks, Eniola. I
Thank you.
know you enjoyed yourselves because, I mean, this is your field of, whatnot, but we truly, truly, found this conversation brilliant. And for everyone who has stayed till this point, whether or not you stayed, thank you so much. You can actually find, someone wrote in the chat that they need to listen to this again and pause for notes. And I agree. And you can do that. There are links in the chat box and we will drop it as well. You can check it out on YouTube. It was streaming the entire time. Some snippets of this were online. You can find us at Africa No Filter across all of this. And for those who are asking, what can you do? You can use the correct map. It's as simple as that. The Equal Earth projection has been made available. You can get it from the campaign website, correctthemap.org. It has all the resources, including some of the bits done by Prof. Carlos himself, around why this is an important change that needs to happen. You can sign the petition. And if you are an institution or a website owner, you can commit through the charter to say, henceforth, you're not participating in the lie about Africa on the map anymore. You put down your name, you put down your signature, and you join the movement. Almost 300 people in terms of institutions have done that so far, and you can be one of us. We don't have to wait for other people to fix something for us to say it's fixed. We've talked about it. We are cheaters. We can fix it right now. Thank you so much. Please share all your comments. Feel free to reach out to our speakers, via social media. Share, tell people about it. And I truly, truly hope that when Africa No Filter and Speak Up Africa engages all the attendees in this room to say, hey, remember that thing you were asking about? Now there is something to do. Let's go and tear a map on a wall somewhere. Everyone will actually follow and we will do it. I truly hope so. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been lovely and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you so much, Eniola and Prof. Carlos. This was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Eniola. Thank you,
All right.
Abimbola.
Take care.